So again, I don't know what you have in front of you. I'm still very confused about that. Tried to send you the pages. Howie Mizell was helping me with that, so I don't know. But again, just in case you have the pages, or you happen to have the Rambam Frankel edition, so we're going to turn to page Tes Zion, and we're on the right column. And finally, the Ramban turns to the Bahag to explain the Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, and how to reconcile the Shita, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, who counts the Rabbinic Mitzvos, the Rabbanans in Taryag, with the statement of Rav Simlai at the end of Makis, that 613 mitzvahs were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. He says, Aval Baal Halachas Gedolos Atzal, Savur, he was of the opinion, Shezua Memra v'chol kayotze b'zeh b'mispar zeh, any statement that includes the principle of Taryag mitzvahs, which would mean Rav Simlai and all the other statements that we saw throughout Shas, that there are 613 mitzvahs, Tafsu b'cheshbonom kol ha-mitzvahs hanogos b'Yisrael l'doros. They included in that number Taryag all the mitzvahs that are noagos l'doros, including Chanukah and Megillah. The Asalem Simon Kiminyan Ramach Evarim, right? These are the mitzvahs say Shal Adam U Kiminyan Yemos Hachama, the 365 days of a solar year, which reflect the 365 days, 365 Losa says. But then, again, it's very nice that, all these statements indicate that there are 613 mitzvahs, but weren't they all given at Har Sinai? Oh, excellent. So we're now on the bottom of the right column on Tes Zion. So now that you have the text in front of you, he says the following. V'osu Simon. Until now, the Ramban was assuming that Taryag mitzvahs is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai transmitted the number 613 as the accurate number of mitzvahs. Now, in the context of the Bahag, who counts even mitzvahs to Rabbanan to make up that number, then the number means something totally different. It's just the number of mitzvahs that are nogos l'doros, but it's not halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's not something that has to be. It's only a simon. They figured out this is the calculation of mitzvahs, and we'll give you a simon. We'll give you something to remember it by. It's 613. It's made up of 248 plus 365. But that's just secondary. That's not really what it's all about. It's all about just making a cheshbon of how many mitzvahs there are l'doros. And if it happens to fall on the number 613, matov umanoim. That's very good. V'lo isa kavanaso shel Rav Simlai b'meimra hazu. We read Rav Simlai, and he tells us there are Taryag mitzvahs. We certainly draw the conclusion that this is what it has to be. It's not just that I'll give you a sima l'dov. Go count the mitzvahs, and you may or may not arrive at 613. And if you do, ma tov u'manoim, you're on board, and we'll give you 365 plus 248 and all the symbolism. No. What was the main thrust of Rav Simlai? What was his intention, according to the Bahag? El lidrosh mashu mashlim aleha. In other words, the Ramban is accusing the Rambam of stopping Rav Simlai in the middle of his sentence. He didn't give Rav Simlai a chance, an opportunity to finish what he wanted to convey. He didn't want to convey the number 613. What he really wanted to convey is that our great giants throughout the history of Klal Yisrael were able to reduce the number of mitzvahs to a smaller number. That's really what Rav Simlai is interested in. The whole impetus and the agenda of Rav Simlai is not the number 613. On the contrary, as we say in Yiddish, Punkt Verkehr. His impetus was to take the number 613 and reduce it to smaller numbers. For example, David HaMelech came along and taught us that there are only 11 mitzvahs. Yeshaya Hanavi came along and said there are only 6 mitzvahs. Chavakuk came along, and he said there's only 1 mitzvah. And that's really the thrust and the purpose of Rav Simlai. The Rambam took the tafel and made it into ikar. What's secondary and not at all significant is the accidental number of 613, which again, if you come up with that number, that's good. And we said that we can find symbolism and so forth and so on. But that's not the main purpose and point of Rav Simlai. What Rav Simlai wanted to teach us was the reduction theory, that we could reduce the number of mitzvahs. And again, just on the side, why is it so significant to reduce the numbers? And that is because we want to find out what are the primary mandates that Almighty God commanded us. What are the primary mandates? I'll give you a mashal amad over dome. The Rambam asked himself the question in his Pirush HaMishnayos in Masechta Sanhedrin. He asked himself the question, what are the primary tenets of the faith? And he came up with 13 tenets of the faith. The Sefer Ikrim, Rav Albo, came up with only 3 tenets of the faith. He reduced them. And there's a whole discussion why the Rambam did not want to rely on the number 3 as those were too generic, and he wanted to break it down into more specifics. But be that as it may, the same kind of approach and methodology applies to Taryag. What we really want to do is take the Taryag mitzvahs and break them down into the most fundamental mitzvos, the most fundamental principles of how to serve God. Not tenets of the faith, that's a different endeavor. But what are the mitzvahs of Hashem? And David HaMelech breaks it down to 11. And Yeshayahu Navi breaks it down to 6. And Chavakuk breaks it down to 1. Tzadik b'emunah so yichya. It's just about emunah. And that's really the ultimate goal of Rav Simlai. V'chein Rav Hemnuna, and don't think that Rav Hemnuna, who came after Rav Simlai, and he asked the question, my Kra, what is the pasuk for Taryag? And he came up with Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, and Torah is 6:11, and 2 mitzvahs Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and Kol Pesel Osasa, etc., were Mipi Agvura, and that equals 613. And once again, we're tempted to draw the conclusion that the Rambam drew, namely that the number 613 is the secret final number, and it's significant in and of itself. And it's indicated by the pasuk, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Says the Ramban, that's not so. That's a total misunderstanding of the Gemara. And he says that Rav Hemnuna shematzalo smach. Let's underline that word smach. My kra. He was asking, is there a pasuk that can give us a smach? Eino ela smachta. Right? Smach is the root of the word asmachta. The remez bialma. This is not some sort of halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This endeavor of trying to find the number 613, and it's got to be 613 or bust. That's not halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's an asmachta. If you count up the mitzvahs, as we said before, you might get lucky. You know, it's like in Lahavdil, it's like in what's that thing in Vegas? You know, the wheel that goes around and around. What's that called? What's it called? The roulette wheel? Yeah, you know, if you get the right number, maybe it'll land on that number. Maybe you'll get lucky. It'll land on 613. Make yourself a list, enumerate the mitzvahs, and shkayach, you know, we'll be happy and we'll be dancing and clapping because you came up with the number 613. But this whole thing is only an esmachta. And the Ramban says, I'll prove to you that it's only an esmachta. First of all, harbe psukim milvad ze kosevem Torah. The word Torah appears throughout the Tanakh over and over again. We never found anywhere in Torah Shabbal Peh that let's look at the word Torah in its context and break it down to the number 611. If this was a real libud, a real yalfusa, as we say, a technical derivation, then we should be consistent about it. And every single time the word Torah appears throughout Tanakh, we should be calculating the number 611 and then see if we could add another 2 and so forth and so on. We never did that. Okay, our one pasuk we found an esmachta. He says, "V'inyan kazeh bekama mekomas betalmud. Nomar al klal hasmachtos binyanim shemidivrei sofrim." What we're seeing here is a phenomenon that appears over and over again. Namely, in a smachta phenomenon, we're talking about midivrei sofrim. We're not talking about Allah l'moshe misinai. We're not talking about some sort of biblical obligation that you've got to come up with 613 and it's got to be that number of bus. No. This is midivrei sofrim. Midivrei sofrim means this is the way the Rabbanan had a kind of a tradition, if you will. But it's not halacha l'moshe misinai. And not only that, I'll tell you more, says the Ramban. And only the Ramban could get away with this, with his encyclopedic knowledge of Kol HaTarkul. He says the following. Sometimes you'll find in Chazal the following phrase, my kra. What is the verse? Other times you'll see in Chazal, mina hani mili. From whence do we derive this? He says the following. Al ha'ikrim, if you're dealing with something that's primary, something that's in and of itself, chok v'lo yavar, you can't budge from it, then omrim, then it will say shenemar, meaning we found it in a pasuk. O minolon, where do you know this from? O minoni mili. V'lo timsa sheyomar bala memra atzmo ma'ikra. You'll never find the phrase my kra when a person, let's call him a Tano and a Mora, presents an ikar. An ikar means like a mitzvah that's obligatory, that's no raisa. He'll never say my kra. He'll say minani mili. He'll say dichsiv or shenemar, and he'll prove to you that this is a biblical requirement based on a pasuk. So he'll quote a pasuk. But that's not what we find here in the case of Rav Simlai and Rav Hemnuna. Rav Simlai, who said that there's 613, and Rav Hemnuna, who said that we could derive it from Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. No. Between the statement of Rav Simlai and that of Rav Hemnuna, we find the following two words, my kra. And it's not Rav Simlai who's asking that question. If, according to the Rambam Taryag Mitzvos, is halacha l'moshe misinai, it's something that's so fundamental, it's an ikar that we must accept, then Rav Simlai himself should have been committed to find the source and prove it. He should have asked the question, minani mili. How do I know this? Shenemar. But whenever we're talking about an esmachta, which is midivrei sofrim, then you'll find that the first memra, which formulates the law of midivrei sofrim, the rule, the mitzvah, the losas, or whatever it might be, midivrei sofrim, he will stop after he presents his thesis, and then someone else will come along and ask the question, not minani mili, but mikra. What does mikra mean? Let's find an esmachta. Let's see if we can find a memory device, some sort of siman l'davar. So in this case of Taryag Mitzvos, instead of Shenemar, or instead of Minani Mili, what we find is that another Amora, subsequent to the original statement of Rav Simloi's Taryag, namely Rav Hemnuna, who came in the next generation, his question was, Ma'ikra. Says the Ramban, what's the difference here? Why is it two different Amoraim? And why didn't he ask Minani Mili? The answer is we're not talking about the Ikrim. We're not talking about something that's absolutely fundamental and that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. We're talking about a situation in which they counted up the mitzvahs, and in this particular shita, they came up with the number 613. They gave it symbolic meaning. Came along Rav Hemnuna and says, I'm going to find an esmachta for this. I'm going to find a remez for this idea of Taryag mitzvahs, and the remez is going to be Torah Tzivul on Moshe. But that's not Minani Mili. That's micro. Bruce.
Did you allude earlier whether it's really more of an agadic statement and doesn't require any further source proofs?
I don't know enough to answer your question, Bruce, because to answer your question, I'd have to know a lot about Agadita. If you ask me for just a kind of intuitive gut reaction, but I can't tell you that this is, as we say in Yiddish, Eisgehalten, that this really works. I would say that in Agadita you won't find asmachtas.
Right.
Agadita is not in the same realm as a smachta. Agadita, you would find interpretations of psukim. Again, those interpretations are Torah Sheba'al Peh, and they may be very far from pshat. In that sense, you're right. There is a certain striking similarity to the concept of a smachta, but I just intuitively, I don't think it's the same thing.
I just know they're trying to research this in depth, and I wonder if it isn't an agadic statement that cannot be proven like a normative argument where one can prove.
So again, Bruce, what I'm trying to tell you, and I'm just shooting from the hip, Agadita has to do with what I would call Jewish philosophy, Jewish morality, Torah HaMusar, as we call it today. That's the realm of Agadita. I don't think the statement of Rav Simloi about Taryag Mitzvos, that's the magic number. I wouldn't call that Agadita. Sometimes we use the word Agadita in a more broad context. Anything that's not, the rigorous and analytic shaklavitaria of a sugya and shas, we call it Agadita.
Also something like Moshe Rabbeinu's 10 meters tall, or Adam Arishon was
right. That's Agadita. But I don't think that Taryag Mitzvos fits that description.
Why not? Why not? It's a number that's represents
again,
something. But it's not a specific number, perhaps.
Agadita is more like I'm going to interpret the Torah and give you some sort of a concept or an idea. I don't think that's what Rav Simlai is interested in. He's telling you that there are Taryag mitzvahs. That's a very strong statement. He tells you the Taryag mitzvahs. And again, even the Bahag is going to tell you that there are Taryag mitzvahs in the sense of mitzvos lidoros, meaning those mitzvahs that are obligatory throughout all of Jewish history come up to the number 613. And we'll see later on that there are certain mitzvahs which the Bahag is going to omit because it's not a mitzvah lidoros. So again, we're going to get into a whole analytics subject matter of what is 613, what's included, what's excluded. I don't know. I don't think that. Again, you could call it Agadita in the generic sense, because anything that's not a halachic discussion, you can call it Agadita. But again, if you want to be technical about what an Agadita is, I don't know that Taryag Mitzvos is an Agadita. But again, leave that out. The brilliance of the Ramban, I don't want you to miss the forest for the trees, is to differentiate between two different Lashonos in the Talmud. One is Minani Mili, and the other is Micro. And again, now that we have computers, it would be an exciting project, if anybody has the time to do this, to punch in these words. now we can really scientifically challenge the Ramban, because the Ramban is saying that if you're talking about a davar ha'ikri, something that is really part of the canon of the Torah and it has to be accepted and you can't question it, then you're going to find minani milu. You won't find mikra. But if you're talking about something that's only an asmachta, that, you made a statement, it has tremendous implications, but, it's not a davar ikri. Somebody could come along and substitute a different number or have a different thesis about how to count the mitzvahs to the Torah. Then mikra is a totally different kind of question. We're not looking to establish based on the Torah, based on the Bible, based on the Tanakh, that this is true and you can't argue with it because of a pasuk in Chumash. That's minani milu. But mikra is something else. Can you give me an asmachta? Can you give me something that may be a memory device or maybe a cute kind of way of seeing and understanding this concept, in this case of Taryag Mitzvos? So that would be a fascinating research project. I mean, the Ramban is really going out on a limb over here. He's saying something that you could check out and see whether he's right or not. And not only that, he's going even a step further. He's saying that mikra is a question that's raised by the next generation. It's not the original Bala Memra. In a case of a davar ikri, meaning a real hardcore mandate of the Torah, the same Mandi Omar who presents that mandate and reveals it, he himself is going to have to answer the question minani milu. But not so in the case of an asmach. V'lo timtza sheyomer bala memra atzmo mikra. You'll never find that the original chacham who made the statement will then ask mikra. He will always ask my dechsiv, efo nemar. He will ask minani mili, but he'll never ask those words mikra. Ella, who could make such a statement? Do you realize how much knowledge you'd have to come up with this observation? Aval chacham acher achra, but a chacham in the next generation, masmich adav lekra. He'll find a smachta. He'll say, "Mikra, can I find an smachta?" It's like a little bit of a support. The word smach means a support. Like you have a man who can't walk on his own 2 feet, so you give him a stick, a staff. That's an asmachta. It gives him a little bit of support. But we're not talking about minani mili. We're not talking about shenemar. There's no such thing with regard to Taryag Mitzvos. You will never find shenemar or minani mili regarding the number 613, which really opens up new vistas in terms of counting mitzvahs. You're no longer stuck, and straitjacketed by the number 613. Rov divrayim yaviu bahem b'loshen mikra psuki kabbalah. He says not only that, in most cases, again, only the Ramban could make this observation. Whenever you see mikra, what's going to come afterward is a pasuk in Nach, in Nevi'im or Ksuvim, not a pasuk in the Torah. Umehem, you may find occasionally an asmachta from a pasuk in Chumash, like this case, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe and Shnayim Mipia Gvura Sham. Kmosha Omer B'Gmar Sanhedrin Omer Rabbi Yitzchak Ein Ben David Ba Ache Tehafech Kol Malchus Kula Minus. Scary statement of Rabbi Levi, Rabbi Yitzchak. He says that, do you know when the Mashiach is going to come? That's when all the governments in the world will be predicated on minus. Minus means, the denial of the one God. Omer Avida Mikra. Again, we're not talking about something that's Ikar Shabi Karim, and if you question the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak, you're out. We're going to put you in a different category. No. Mikra. Find me an asmachta. Omer Avina Mikra. Kulo hafach lovan toru. The pasuk says in the parsha of Mitzorah that if everything turns white, paradoxically, it's a simon tara. usually when you have a dermatological, pathological phenomenon, it turns white. The skin, instead of being flesh color, it turns white. But if the entire body turns white, then the Torah says it's tar. Very strange, very antithetical to our common knowledge. And Ravina wants to say that that's a shall we say, an asmachta for this concept that the whole world is going to turn to minus at the time when Ben David bought. V'chein lashon ha'agadata berus v'nami. Do you remember that the Gemara tells us in Yevamis, we saw it on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, that Nami tried to discourage Rus from joining the Jewish people. Tafsu lehem kol ha-mitzvos. And Rus is told by Nami that there are going to be 613 mitzvahs. That's a heck of a lot of mitzvahs that you're obligated in. Eina kavana, what was Nami had in mind here? Ella, her intention was sha'amrla schuma mitzvahs kulam kadesha tifrosh. She was giving her a whopping number, a gigantic number, 613, so that Rus would finally drop the ball. Not for me.
Rabbi?
Just 1 second. She chashvu sha'amrla beruach hakodesh. Listen to this. He's now defending the Bahag that Naomi had ruach hakodesh. That's a chiddush. And with ruach hakodesh, Naomi was able to tell Rus afilu mitzvos hasidos lehischadesh, because the Gemara in Yevamis mentions Tchum Shabbos, that amongst the mitzvahs that Naomi presented to Rus was Tchum Shabbos. You can't go out of the city more than 2,000 amma beyond the periphery of the city, the boundary of the city. The mitzvah divrei. That's only rabbinic. So what did the Gemara mean when it said that Naomi tried to push away Rus by scaring her with the number 613, and included in the 613 was Tchum Shabbos, which is only D'Rabbanan. Obviously, what Naomi was trying to tell Rus was that there are many mitzvahs shasidos liva, even mitzvahs that are no, because who actually established the Tchum Shabbos? It was Shlomo HaMelech. Wait, just 1 second. Shlomo HaMelech is way before Rus, right? Because David HaMelech is 4 generations after Rus. Meaning Shlomo is 5 generations after Rus. How did Naomi know anything about Tchum Shabbos? She knew Ruach HaKodesh. Do you hear myself?
Isn't that a perfect example of kind of an agadic type or midrashic comment?
For sure. Absolutely. This is a classic agadita. But what the Ramban is saying is that if you understand the meaning that Chazal are trying to convey here, it's not about the number 613 necessarily, because I'll prove it to you. The Rambam refuses to include the Rabbanans in 613, and yet the Gemara includes Tchum Shabbos in the mitzvahs that Naomi presented to Rus. Understand, Rus, that if you're in a city on Shabbos and you didn't make an Eruv, you're going to be stuck. You won't be able to visit. I'm in Dagan. So on Shabbos, I want to visit my friends in Tamar. Okay? I don't know if it's it's probably 2,000 amma. Certainly my friends in Hagefen, right? So I'm not allowed to go from Dagan to to Hagefen without an Erev Tchumen. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we have an Erev, but let's say we didn't have an Erev. So this is the way Naomi is trying to scare Rus and push her away from. Now, how did Naomi know about Tchum Shabbos, which was established by Shlomo HaMelech 5 generations later? So the first chiddush of the Ramban is that Naomi had Ruach HaKodesh. But the second chiddush of the Ramban is that included in the number of mitzvahs which Naomi quoted to Rus are mitzvah shasidos that were not given in Har Sinai. Whole different approach to Taryag mitzvahs.
Are all the mitzvot that relate to the Mishkan transferable to the Beit HaMikdash, which is post all this? So that we say 613, there's nothing unique to the Beit HaMikdash?
Can you ask your question one more time? I'm sorry, Bruce. There are
When we say,
mitzvahs in
when we
Mikdash
say
and there are mitzvahs in Mishkan.
yeah, when we say 613, we're including a lot of mitzvot that relate to the temple service.
Correct,
So
for sure.
when we say that they began with the Mishkan and there's nothing at all unique, specific to Doraita mitzvot, so to speak, for the Beit HaMikdash, because they're all Mishkan based. There's nothing unique to the actual Beit HaMikdash, and therefore all the rituals that we do are from the Mishkan, and therefore
So basically, Bruce, what you're doing here is you're asking a kasha on the Rambam and you're defending the Ramban. Let me explain what I mean. According to the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu received 613 mitzvahs at Har Sinai. How could that be? What about all the mitzvahs that apply to the Beis HaMikdash that were not even operative at the time of, for the 40-year period of time in which Moshe Rabbeinu was the Melech B'Yisrael in the Midbar, when they had a Mishkan? And again, to let the cat out of the bag, the Ramban is going to prove to us that even mitzvahs in the Torah were not given at Har Sinai. For example, the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. What happened? A group of people, Chazal say they were Anoshim Chashuvim, maybe they were the ones who carried the coffin of Yosef, whatever it was. They came forward and said, Lama Nigra, why should we be left out from the Korban Pesach? So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have an answer. Apparently at Har Sinai, he didn't get the answer to this question. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the parsha of Pesach Sheni. And the Ramban is going to prove that there are tens of mitzvahs that were not given in Har Sinai. They were mitzvahs that came over the course of time. And even the Rambam counts those mitzvahs in Taryag. So again, I'm letting the cat a little bit out of the bag here because that would be part of the excitement of our punchline to this whole discussion. That it's impossible to understand that Taryag mitzvahs were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. It just cannot be, even according to the Rambam. So when the Rambam is going to attack the Bahag, how can you include mitzvahs to Rabbanon in Taryag when mitzvahs to Rabbanon were not given at Har Sinai? When Mordechai and the Sanhedrin decided to be Mechayev us in the mitzvah of Megillah, that mitzvah was not given at Har Sinai. And therefore the Rambam rejects the Bahag. How can you possibly count the mitzvah of Megillah reading in Taryag? What do you mean? And according to the Rambam, all 613 were given at Har Sinai? Impossible. And the Ramban is going to prove this over and over and over again, that the Rambam himself is involved in a contradiction in terms by laying down the premise, according to the Rambam, that Taryag mitzvahs were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. He is stuck in an untenable position. And your example from Beis HaMikdash is an excellent example of mitzvahs that were given later on. Moshe Rabbeinu was at the time of the Mishkan, not at the time of the Mikdash. And we're going to be counting myriads of mitzvahs from the Beis HaMikdash, included in Taryag. Just want to see how we're doing on the clock. Okay, we're not bad. I'm telling you, Rabbosai, I keep saying this over and over again, but I can't hold myself back. I am so amazed with the Ramban. The mind that he had, it's just mind-boggling. The Achrei Zeh Omar, Ki Arav Heshiv al Bal Halachas Gedolos Zal Arba Tshuvos. Now I want to tell you, says the Ramban, that the Rambam here in the Shroshim has attacked the Bahag with 4 questions. Sounds like Leil HaPesach. But listen how the Ramban describes those questions. Tshuvos yafos. Beautiful questions, objections. Vitovos. Interesting. He gives the Rambam a grade. I call this intellectual honesty. He's about to smash the Rambam to smithereens. He's about to defend the Bahag against the Rambam on the very essence of what Taryag Mitzvos means, but he's willing to give accolades to the Rambam for 4 questions, objections that the Rambam raised against the Bahag, and they're all yafos vitovos, ma'oros halavavos. They really give us a feeling, almost an emotional attachment to the Rambam's position against the Bahag. Umolidos machshavos, and they really stimulate the mind. In other words, the Ramban is not saying about the Rambam that he was a slouch. Lasher lahem, and this is true for anyone who has a nayim pkuchos, he has eyes that open, v'oz nayim kshuvos, and ears that hear. So let's start, says the Ramban, by calling a spade a spade. The Rambam has 4 objections against the Bahag for including 7 mitzvahs d'Rabbanan in the Taryag, and they're all tovos and yafos, ma'oros, machshava v'lev. Barishona, the first of the Rambam's 4 objections, Omar, the Rambam says, Kishayeh Lashon Talmud, how is the Bahag going to support the language of the Talmud? Nemru lo leMoshe. The Talmud says at the end of Makis, Rav Simloi, 613 mitzvahs were told to Moshe Rabbeinu. Eich nomer b'dover shehu midrabanan. How could you possibly say, Bahag, that a mitzvah d'Rabbanan shu bechlal haminyan hazeh? We're on page Yud Zayin. The minyan itself is Taryag mitzvah shenemru lo leMoshe. And you're going to include Netilas Yadayim, and you're going to include Tchum Shabbos, and you're going to include Megillah and Chanukah? Nemru lo leMoshe? How could you say such a thing? So first the Ramban, listen to the scholarship. The Ramban went back to the Gemara at the end of Makis, the statement of Rav Simloi, and he determined that it doesn't say Shenemru lo leMoshe. It just ain't there. Because keep in mind, the Ramban, living 1,000 years ago almost, he had access to transcripts, to manuscripts of the Shas, some of which, by the way, we have today. I mean, again, you have to go to the museums and so forth and so on, but we have reproductions of them. I myself own a copy of the Shas from where? From Venice. I have a photocopy of the original Shas Venice. You can get it, I don't know which stores would carry it, but if you're interested. He says, Ba'al halachos eino goris ken. In the text of the Talmud that was on the table of the Bahag, it didn't say those words, Shenemru lo leMoshe. Aval benusach Shelo matzasi kasuv. I found in the manuscript of the Shas that the Bahag had, Doresh Rav Simloi, Sheish Me'osu Shlosh Esrei Mitzvos Nitztavu Yisrael. Klal Yisrael were commanded in 613. It doesn't say that they were Nemru leMoshe Misina. It removes the rug from underneath the entire taina of the Rambam. The Rambam is building mountains on these 3 words, Shenemru lo leMoshe. It doesn't say Shenemru lo leMoshe in the text of the Talmud that we have. V'haloshan hazeh, in the language of 630 mitzvahs nitztavu Yisrael, the Jewish people are commanded, Yichlo, we include kol ma shenitztavu afilu midrabanan. even if it's rabbinic, as long as it's noeg l'doros, it fits into the number 613 mitzvahs, and it's tavu behen Yisrael. And he adds the following punchline. Ube mitzvah shel divreim, on a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, like Kriyas HaMegillah, Anu Muvarchim, we make the bracha, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvosa v'tzivanu. What does v'tzivanu mean? V'tzivanu means it's a mitzvah. How could you say it's a mitzvah if it's only the Rabbanan? The answer is because we have 613 mitzvos, then Noagos l'doros, Nitztavu ben Yisrael l'chol hadoros, and they include even the Rabbanans. Otherwise, you're a shakran. You're an absolute liar if you say about a mitzvah the Rabbanan, Asher kitshanu mitzvosa v'tzivanu. Where's v'tzivanu? You calling it a mitzvah? Chutzpah? The Rambam's not willing to call it a mitzvah. Now, this is fascinating because if you remember when we first started our project about the authority of Chachamim to create mitzvahs, we pointed out that it's Dafka the Rambam who holds that mitzvahs d'Rabbanan are included under Lo Tosur Mikol Asher Yerucha and Kol Asher Yomlecha, that you have to be Makayim, the Divrei Chachamim. In a sense, I think what the Ramban is doing now is he's boomeranging the Rambam's argument against himself. You yourself, again, that's Berzon, but I'm saying you yourself, Rambam, were the one who said that every D'Rabbanan was included under the Doraisa of Lo Tosur V'Yasisa K'chol Asher Yerucha, and that's why we make a bracha on a mitzvah D'Rabbanan, and you're not willing to include the mitzvahs D'Rabbanan in mitzvahs, in our counting of mitzvahs? You yourself were the one, Rambam, who elevated a D'Rabbanan to a quasi-Doraisa status, including it in the Losas. If you remember the Ramban's objection to the Rambam, then every case of Suffolk to Rabbanan should be L'chumra. You remember that whole discussion that we had. But of course, the Rambam is going to say, okay, there is such a thing as a mitzvah to Rabbanan. I'm not denying it. And the authority of the Chachamim to mandate a mitzvah to Rabbanan like Megillah and Chanukah is written in the Torah itself. That's the Rambam. But it was not given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. And the number 613, according to the Rambam's Girsa, is the number of mitzvahs that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. Umikol makom. Now watch this umikol makom. The Ramban is about to take upon himself an unbelievable project, an unbelievable challenge. You know what? Let's accept the Rambam's Girsa in the Gemara. Let's, for argument's sake, assume that the correct text, if we had the right manuscript of the Shas, Bavli, Makos, Chaf Daled, Daf Chaf Daled says in it, Taryag Mitzvos Nitzta Nemru Lo Moshe Rabbeinu Bahar Sinai. I'll grant you that. I'm going to still defend the Baha. Now that's like climbing Mount Everest. How can you include mitzvahs d'Rabbanan under Nemru L'Moshe Sinai? How could it be? I'm going to accept that girsa for the time being. Eino davar rachok v'nifla lahavi b'chlalan miut mitzvah shel divrayim mishloshatam. Eino rachok. It's not far-fetched to include mitzvahs d'Rabbanan in the number tayag shenemru l'Moshe v'Har Sinai. But here you have to underline one word in the Ramban. And you could, if you read the Ramban too quickly, you could miss it. Which word do I have in mind? Anybody? Miut. Do you see that word miut? Again, that's why I like to teach this class from a text, because we're learning a text b'chavrusa here. Miut. In other words, the Ramban concedes the truth here that Nemru L'Moshe Misinai has to relate to at least the majority of the mitzvahs. I can slip in the miut, as the Ramban is going to present in a minute, but only because it's a miut, it's a minority. So how much is 613 minus 7? Let's say we end up with 600 and how much? And 15. I'm sorry, what am I talking about? 603. No, 608. 608. Correct? Did I get that right? 606 plus 7. I'm sorry, 606. 606. If anybody can convert that to quickly take out your computer, your calculator, to a statistical probability, that's probably like 95%. How much is that? I mean, it's a very high probability. 606 out of 613. You have that author for me, maybe? Can you do that for me? It's about 95%. I mean, again, I'm rounding it off.
99%.
99%. Wow. So 1% of the number 613 were not given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. Again, we're going to see it's a much higher percentage than 1%. But nevertheless, you can grant me, give me a little breathing space, what do they call it, the leash, give me a little bit of room on the leash for 1%. Don't be so stingy. And now I'm going to give you 3 reasons, 3 explanations, says the Ramban, to justify that mitzvahs d'Rabbanan are included in Nemru L'Moshe Mi'ar Sinai. Mitzvahs d'Rabbanan are included in Nemru L'Moshe Mi'ar Sinai. 3 reasons. Ha'echad, number 1. Mipnei she'achachamim nogim zeh tamid lehavi b'inyanim shel divreim lashon Torah ulechazek osam od b'psukei HaTorah. Okay, I'm just fast forwarding for a second. I'll come back to this. Afal pisha heim midrabanan below suffolk. He says the following. We look into the language of the Torah and we're seeking doraisas. We're not looking for the Rabbanans. You won't find the Rabbanans in the Lashon of the Torah. Am I right? I'm wrong. Says the Rabban, I'm operating with a critical error if I think that what's written in the Torah is doraisa and a Rabbanan is not written in the Torah. I'm going to prove to you, says the Ramban, this is his first argument of 3, that we can look into the Torah and we can discover the Rabbanans. That sounds like the most bizarre thing I ever heard in my life. And the Ramban says, I challenge you, I'm going to prove it to you. Do you hear where the Ramban is taking us? That we're going to look into the Torah, we're going to derive a mitzvah in the Torah, and that mitzvah is only the Rabban. If I would use colloquial language, I would say the Ramban went off his rocker. He says the following. K'mo she'amru Rosh Hashanah daf Yud Zayin. Or maybe it's daf Tet Zayin. It should be. Mipnei ma Omra Torah. Do you hear these words? Omra Torah. Nischu mayim b'chag. On Sukkot we have a mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim. And the Gemara says, Omra Torah. The Torah tells us that we are obligated in Nisuch HaMayim. Remember the pasuk Ushafta Mayim b'Sason, and we have all the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. All that is from the Torah. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Nischu Mayim Lifneach Lifanai Bachag Kedeshi is barchu lachem gishmei shana. And the Gemara is going to derive from Psukim in the Torah the mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim on the Chag, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands us, quote, Nischu Mayim lefanai b'Chag, kidei she'yizbarchu lachem gishmei shana. I guess we didn't do a good job this last Sukkos. Okay, we didn't have the Mikdash. I think they told me this is the worst drought in decades. Anyway, what does it mean, Mipnei Ma'amar Torah? How could you say Mipnei Ma'amar Torah? The mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim is midivreihem. It is not a mitzvah d'oraisa to pour the water onto the Mizbeach. The mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim is a rabbinic mitzvah. Umipnei Ma'amar Torah. Niskayim, etc., etc. You remember the whole drush of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Imru lafanai b'Rosh Hashanah malchios zichronos v'shofros. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Rosh Hashanah that we blow the shofar after Malchus. We blow the shofar again after Shofars. We blow the shofar again after Zichronos, right? Over and over and over again. And the Gemara derives this from Psukim in the Torah. And the Gemara asks, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu declare that Imru Lefanai Malchus Zichronos Shofars? Imru Lefanai, God Himself is commanding us to recite these three brachos. V'adavar yadua b'gemara she'enam ela d'Rabbanan. I'm going to prove to you that these recitations are only rabbinic. How do I know this? The Gemara says in Eino Tokel Malchus Lamu Maski the Rachmana Amar Lidkar, the Torah commands us to recite Malchios. The Afal Pisha Heim b'Rabbanan below Suffolk. I'm going to prove to you beyond the shadow of a doubt that this Amira of Malchus is only the Rabbanan, because the Gemara says if you have a choice between two cities, in one city, they blow the shofar, but they don't recite Malchus. I mean, imagine they didn't have Sidurim like we have. In another city, they recite Malchus, but they don't blow the shofar. They just simply don't have a shofar. The Gemara says, Holchim l'makom shetokim. Go. By the way, in the army, I think I had this experience once. Anyway, but it happens in Tzahal. Go to the place where they blow the shofar, even though they have no clue as to how to recite Malchus. They don't have machzorim. V'ein holchem l'makom shemevarchem Malchus, because there, even though they recite Malchus, they don't have a shofar. And the Gemara says pshita. For sure, that's correct. Had Rabbanan v'had oraisa. To hear the shofar is the oraisa. To recite Malchus is only the Rabbanan. And yet, with regard to Malchus, the Gemara tells us the Rachmana Amar Lidkar, the Torah commands us to recite Malchus, and it's only the Rabbanan. V'chein amru od. Now, in my text, there's an empty space here. You have that, right? I don't know what that empty space is. I think it's just the printer added that space, to make it easier to read, I think. I don't want to assume that something is missing from the words of the Ramban. I think the Ramban is saying v'chein amru od, meaning if we had time, I would prove to you that this is a phenomenon that repeats itself over and over again. That the Gemara is going to tell us, the Talmud is going to establish that this pasuk teaches us what God Himself commanded us, and we're talking about a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Now we get on to the Ramban's second argument. Vasheni, ki minhag hachachamim b'Talmud. Okay, this is the principle of rov, of majority. Now, first, the Ramban starts a little bit, like laid back, a little bit low profile. Minhag hachachamim b'Talmud, that the Talmud would very often round it off to a number which really is not accurate, because the rov is correct, but not the mir. But then he says, "V'gam b'Torah v'Neviim." And I'm going to prove to you that even in the Torah itself, the Torah will give you numbers that are not accurate. And those are based on rov, on majority. The Torah sometimes doesn't bother to exclude the minority. It just makes a sweeping, all-inclusive statement that includes even the minority, even though that's not an accurate number. Where do we see such a thing? I would say this is a chutzpah noira. The Ramban is accusing the Torah itself of using numbers that are not accurate. We should put him in cherem for that. Ke'inyan shekasuv, in Vayishlach it says, Eile b'nei Yaakov asher yulad lo b'Padan Aram, on the list of enumerated children of Yaakov that were born in Padan Aram, Hinei Choshev Binyamin. Binyamin's on the list. V'lo nolad b'Padan Aram. Binyamin was born much later. Chakal Arov Yadaber. The Torah speaks about the rov. V'chein, on the top left here on Yud Zayin, Vayigash Mem Vav, Kol HaNefesh Haba LiYaakov Mitzrayma, Shivim. The Torah says there were 70 nefashos that came down to Mitzrayim. Ain't so. There were only 67. Yosef didn't go down. Ephraim didn't go down. And Menashe didn't go down. So how could the Torah say, B'shivim nefesh, a pasuk in Chumash? Whereas the Hungarians would say in Chumash. It says, B'shivim nefesh, Yardu Avos Seder Mitzrayim. It's not true. V'hine Ephraim v'Menashe lo bo LiYaakov Mitzrayim, v'gam Yosef sham hoya. I have trouble with this Ramban. I don't think this Ramban is playing fair game. How are we doing on the clock? Am I still? All right, I'll just add one thing. I know. Oh, wait, you have a shir now? Oh, so, for anyone who can stay, I just want to point out, I don't think the Ramban is being fair over here. Where do I have a chumash here? These are the Rambams. The chumash. Try this chumash. Let's see. If you open up to the pasuk that the Ramban is invoking here in Perek Mem Vav of Breishis, let me just see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Pasuk Chavav. Now, keep in mind, the Ramban is quoting Pasuk Chav Zayin to prove his point. But let's read Pasuk Chavav. Somehow the Ramban skips Pasuk Chavav here. It's like qualified documents. I'm not going to refer to the President of the United States, but anyway, what does it say in Pasuk Chavav? Kol HaNefesh Haba LiYaakov Mitzrayim, Yotze Yerecho, Milvad Neshei B'nei Yaakov, Kol Nefesh Shishim V'Sheish. The pasuk says there are only 66. We subtract Yaakov, right, because he's saying Haba Li Yaakov, and we subtract Yosef and his two sons. The Torah itself says explicitly there are 66. The Torah didn't round it off. In the next pasuk, the Torah says that Kol Nefesh LeBeis Yaakov Haba Mitzrayma, meaning after all is said and done, and you have the 66 plus Yaakov plus Yosef and his two sons, Shivim, then there's 70. And the Mefarshim have a whole discussion here as to why the Torah first gives us the accurate number, namely 66, and then rounds it off to 70, because the Torah wants to indicate a whole nother subject matter here in the second pasuk. And that is that Klal Yisrael came to Mitzrayim as a very small community. They numbered only 70. And then
but the first pasuk says, aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, so there are only, so if you go 66 and then you go 70, are you saying there were 4 wives for the Jacob's sons? I don't know. That sounds kind of weird.
I lost you, Arthur. I'm just saying the actual accurate number is 66. And the Ramban
right. Chafaf says 66, but it excludes the wives of Yaakov's sons.
Excluding
Yaakov's
the wives.
Sons.
If you exclude the wives, you get to the number 66.
So then when they say the whole household equals 70, are you saying there were only 4 wives around from Yaakov's sons?
No. Again,
because then the number still doesn't make sense.
No. He's saying the pasuk 70 is the accurate pasuk minus the wives. But I'm just pointing out that although the Ramban is arguing that the number 70 is not accurate, he is somehow oblivious, ki'ilu. I mean, there's no such thing as the Ramban oblivious, but to the first pasuk that tells you that the number was 66. There are 2 different ideas that are being conveyed by these 2 different psukim. But it's not that the Torah just rounded it off to the number 70. That's not true. The Torah is very meticulous that the number, again, minus the wives, was 66. There were only 66 nefashos that came down to Mitzrayim if you exclude Yaakov and you exclude Yosef and Barnabas. So I'm just pointing out then, I don't think that this would be an adequate proof to the Rambam. To the Ramban. The previous quote about Binyamin that wasn't born in Padam Aram, that's what we call a starka raya. That's very and then he goes on and on with other rayas to prove that the Torah itself rounds off numbers. And if the Torah rounds off numbers, how much more so the Chachmei Talmud will round off numbers. And when they say that there were 613 that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, it's 99% true, but it's not 100% true. And as we'll soon see in the Ramban, which is a fascinating piece of research, the Ramban is going to prove to us that there were many mitzvahs that are included in Taryag that were not given to Moshe and Har Sinai. The whole story of Benos Slavcha and the story of Pesach Sheni and the Makoshesh Eitzim, and over again, you see that there were mitzvahs that were not given to Moshe and Har Sinai. And yet they counted in Taryag. Okay, Rabbosai?
Well, therefore
I hope you're enjoying this. I mean, to me, this is like Gan Eden in this world. It's incredible. The Ramban's scholarship and his honesty, and it's just marvelous. I wonder, they ask you if you could go back in a time machine, who would you like to sit with? Obviously my parents, but besides that, I'd like to sit with the Ramban. All right, Kol Tuv. Everyone should be well.